Yes. So I'll maybe just say if you don't want to be, oh, actually, you already did that. So here we have it. This is our kind of like plan on a page, which we talked through and worked through last week. And we talked about the different tools to get you to this place where you have this, a plan of what you're going to do. And just wanted to really highlight that there's so many different ways to make a strategy, but at its heart, in Jane McAlevy's words, it's knowing what you have and what you need to get what you want. So it's about checking reality and knowing how you're going to get to where you want to go. So the key aspects of a strategy that we talked through last time was the map. So doing your research and understanding the land you stand on, the political and social context that you are working in, and understanding your group, your strengths and your weaknesses, and also getting a lay of the land about what's on the horizon, what threats and opportunities are on the horizon. And there's a few, and also the stage of movement that you are a part of or want to be a part of is in. And in the campaign strategy worksheet, there's a couple of links of great tools to help you figure out that stuff and be really grounded at where you are. And then the next key bit is your vision. It's your long-term, it's where you're going. It's the ultimate dream. It's the putting into words, into concrete, tangible, understandable words, the shared goal, overarching goal of your team and what you're there coming together to work on. And you might have many different visions relating to different kaupapa, but if you're working in a group, you need to be clear about where you're all heading together. So it's going to make the rest of this discussion really easy or easier. And then you choose what's your first step, what's the obvious next step, what's the change, a tangible change that in the current climate you're in, and with the resources you have available to you, you're going to be able to change. What's a change that will then be a stepping stone towards your long-term vision? So choosing your first step. And then we talked about the different tools you use to figure out who you need to get on board to help you realize that step, and how a strategy is, how a strategy is essentially that, knowing who you need to do, what you're going to do to get who you need to do the thing that's gonna make the change you want. So your theory of change is if we do this, then this will happen because this will happen. And we talked about the importance of saying your theories of change out loud, testing them. Are they believable? Theory of change shouldn't just be like a nice sentence that makes you feel good. Theory of change should be like it should be a theory of how things could change that everyone in your group agrees is feasible, and that people outside of your group also believe in. It should be based in fact, in reality. The because is a really important part. Like why is the person going to do the thing? And then you come into what you're actually going to do. So SMARTY goals are smart, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable goals. And there is a link in this sheet as well to help you figure out your SMARTY goals, and then also how you kind of work your tactics into them. And I guess the last thing I just want to say on this, so once you've got your two things, actually, you've got a whole plan, and you could have two strategies that help you work towards your aim, so two theories of change that have their own goals and tactics underneath them, or you could have one. And you know what? You could have one theory of change with one SMARTY goal and one tactic, and that's enough to get your boat sailing. Like so often, because we've done all our research, we start to see all the complexities everywhere, and that's great. But also sometimes you've got to like just start seeing how things move and change, and you can add your tactics along the way. As long as your aim and your theory of change is good, I just really want to help us all collectively break through paralysis analysis, which is like this feeling of like, oh gosh, but what happens first? Or what can I actually do about it? And it's really want to say, you learn so much once you start getting going. the real learning happens once you start doing a thing. And it's totally fine to pick something small just to break the ice and start moving and start seeing how people respond to it, and how to kind of give your group some time to figure out how you're working together. It's take steps, get your ball moving, and then you'll start to see how new opportunities come up, or how other tactics that you kind of have on your list become the obvious next thing to do, or how they're like, you're like, oh, we actually don't need to do that, though that's not quite the right thing, and you start to bring in a more relevant tactic. So I just really want to say, also, you know, starting small is great because it's easy to scale up, and it's hard, but it's hard to scale back if you've already promised things to others. So think of something you can do and deliver it, do it well, learn from it, and then build from there. Yeah, and I think that's it, actually. Just have a good plan, know the land you stand on, and then start trying things out and expect things to go wrong. I'll hand it back to you, Vera.
Awesome. And I'll move us to campaign timeline. Okay, cool. So a campaign timeline is basically just a really great way to visualize things like key events, milestones, deadlines, and it's a good way to plan, execute, and monitor progress within your campaign. It helps to ensure that, you know, all of the important information is in one place, easily accessible for the whole team so that everyone is on the same page. And so I added some examples. So the first example of like a campaign timeline is a very kind of basic zoomed out timeline. You can see that it was divided into 3 sections: planning, fundraising, implementation, and handover. Um, just ignore the dates because I don't think that they're actually in line with what like local elections are. But you can kind of use this as a timeline that you can share with external parties. So other organizations, your community, other groups, just so that they have like a rough idea of the timeline that you're working with. And then another one, another good example is this one. And so they're like different softwares that you can use. I know that some, you know, organizations or groups use things like Maru. We use Asana quite a bit. The issue with some of them, even like Excel, is that they're like behind a paywall. And so what we also use is Google Sheets because it's free and it's quite accessible and kind of easy to learn all of the things you need to make good sheets. And so what we did is this is kind of an example of a launch of a video that was done for a campaign OurActionStation did a few years back. And I've removed some of the things for privacy, but you can see how like we visualized all of the moving parts within a campaign that needed to be done before the video could be launched. And so some of the things to keep in mind when you're creating your timeline are obviously the key dates within your campaign. So, for example, when you're meeting an MP or when you're handing over a petition, but then it's also important to kind of keep key dates within your timeline that are out of your control. So public holidays, political events such as elections, religious events, days that aren't necessarily holidays, but that are still celebrated. So International Oceans Day, International Women's Day. You can also think about anniversaries, something that someone did, which was pretty cool on OAS. They launched a petition on like the 50th anniversary of the Misuse of Drugs Act, to kind of like, bounce their petition and have it within like the public eye, which is pretty cool. And so another important thing to keep in mind is that there might be low periods as well, low capacity periods, where, you know, planning ahead allows you to, for example, if people go on holiday, allows you to pre-plan scheduled emails to send out, to make sure that at least one person is there in case something happens and like you need to send out a press release. And so it's really up to you and your team on how detailed and specific you want the timeline to be. But yeah, you can be quite creative with it if you like.
Cool. So coming back to review, yeah, just wanted to, I think this is such an important and sometimes a missed part of campaigning, which is to stop and ask ourselves what's changing. So really encourage you to set regular review dates, and we often find like every 3 months is a kind of like natural rhythm to just have a bit of a review. Or at OurActionStation we actually do monthly full team reviews where it always surprises me. I think there's like nothing really to review or nothing that we need to unpack, and it always surprises me how much is. Obviously we're quite a big team doing a lot of things all at the same time, so every month might not be needed for your team, but I think at least every 3 months just to take a stop and say like, hey, is what we're doing working? Or what could we be doing differently? And also like at the end of each tactics, and I really think this is always great for like keeping the learning. Like your group might be needed for the next 10 to 20 years before it reaches the vision that it's ultimately working towards. So if you can document what worked well and what you learned when you're doing a particular activity or a particular tactic, it's going to be really helpful for the vision of you in the future. And I think as campaigners and activists, often like burnout is a real thing, and we over the years have lost so much institutional knowledge by people kind of just having to leave the movement for whatever reason. And yeah, I think by writing things down and having really honest reviews is one way we can keep a bit more of that knowledge, as well as obviously looking after ourselves and our peers more. And then another really important time to review is when the context changes, like COVID, for example. That changed everything for how we campaigned and all of our plans. And if we hadn't stopped and reworked our plans, we would have missed a lot of opportunities, but we also would have been walking against a brick wall. And really, like, I have these images down here in this quote, which is actually not from Einstein, but everyone thinks it's from Einstein, and I love it, which is insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And if I could have an animation here, I would have someone like kind of walking at a good pace, but against a brick wall and not actually getting anywhere. And I think and that's because I think sometimes when we're doing something, we can be like, yeah, we're doing something, and because like we need to start doing something to learn. But if we don't stop to check if the thing we're doing is making distance, then we're just wasting our energy. And yeah, I mean, I feel like the whole point of the session is to help you move from great ideas and a great strategy to doing. These are all tools you can use for doing. So don't let the lack of review stop you from doing, but just bake it into your plans, and use it as opportunities also for team bonding and to come together and maybe share kai and check in with each other on a deeper level. Yeah, and like this little image shows, once you identify your problem, then you can figure out different ways that you're going to solve it. And it might be a change of tactic to something a bit more aggressive, or it might be pulling in some allies to help you just climb over the wall. Do you want to move on to the next slide? So these are just some ideas for review questions. What went well or is working? What didn't go well? What isn't working? What surprised us? I think this is an important question because it invites a bit of curiosity and like looking for the unexpected. And I think that's really important. Like, what are the unexpected things that are happening or reactions to your tactics that you didn't see? And they can be clues for kind of shortcuts or like extra free energy towards your vision or meeting your goals or meeting another one of your goals that you hadn't previously seen the opportunity for. And then another really important one, knowing what we now know, what would we do differently or needs to change in our strategy, and just having that moment to step back out and be like, is there anything about our theory of change? Are there any assumptions we've made about who has power or who they're influenced by that needs to change? Or are there any assumptions about like the kind of people that go to community markets where we thought we would be getting so many signatures, and it turns out they're all just there for the free cheese and they don't want anything to do with our petition, like let's think about what we might want to change in that. And then here I have a great quote. I'm not sure like who it actually comes from, but it's one of something that Cassie says a lot, who is our boss, which is every failure is data. And there's so many great quotes out there about failure, or like not even failure, just learning has been important. There's the one from Thomas Edison, the great inventor, which was, I didn't fail. I just found 10,000 ways that don't work, which I love. And I think we all might relate to in the social sphere change sphere. And then a personal favorite of mine, which is, you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. And that is by the legendary Maya Angelou. And yeah, if you have any other great quotes about how learning or failing is like really wonderful and interesting and helps us get to where we want to go, please feel free to put them in the chat, because I think when you work on kaupapa that's so important to you, it can feel like we can't afford to fail. And that can like add a layer of like heaviness or angst that I think is unhelpful. Like, we need to fail fast, and then learn, and then try something new. So yeah, any more, I'm always out here crowdsourcing for more quotes about the beauty of failure. Or if you have any ideas of like review questions that have really worked for you and your team, really keen to see them in the chat. Yeah. And maybe just one more point on that is like social change is it doesn't matter what slide. I think that one of the other things that are important with review is that social change isn't, it's like part science, because you can measure some things and figure out what, like how people behave and what's going to happen next. But it's a lot art, and it's a lot something else. It's a third something else. And like, whatever you want to call that something else, it's the intangible changing conditions, political changes, public mood. Is it the moon sometimes? Like, let's be honest, it is so intangible, that third bit, that we really need to review so we can figure, like, so we can get clues from that third bit, because it's often that third quarter that's not political, that's not art or a science that creates the conditions for the biggest change. Cool. On to team, another really important cornerstone for getting you moving. So the questions you want to ask yourself, let's move here. So these are just some key agreements I think every team needs. There might be other key agreements or terms of reference, some people call them, about how you're going to work together. But so values, principles, and guardrails. We use principles and guardrails at ActionStation. So they're things like principles are things like our campaigns actively live into Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or we stay connected to and take leadership from people with lived experience from systemic barriers. These are some of our principles. Or our guardrails are things like, we don't support or campaign for progress in one kaupapa that is going to undermine our long-term or the collective movement's long-term vision for another kaupapa. And another guardrail for us is that we're independent from political parties, corporate or government influence. Our allegiances to our issues, our values, and our members. So we've got these real clear lines that we can't cross. So I think that's also, I just love the campaigning against SodaStream going on in the chat, by the way. If you're a bubbly water drinker, take note. Yeah, so I think that's just really important because people might have different guiding values, principles, and guardrails outside of the group, but as a group, you just have to agree what your ones are within that group. And that's about keeping everyone safe. And I think it's also really important because we've got to remember like what we're doing in our campaign groups is not disconnected from our community relationships, from our relationships with our family and our relationships with our colleagues. Like we do all end up becoming somewhat responsible and held accountable for what our group does. So being able to give you all to kaupapa into the group that you're working with is also about making sure that we have these really clear guardrails so we can trust each other. We can trust that I'm all in on this group and someone from this group isn't going to go do something in our name that's then going to like split my family up or like have people throwing eggs at me in the street. Those are quite extreme examples, but it is really important to have those explicit. And yeah, and so when you're bringing new people in, it's kind of the filter in which they either join your group or they don't join your group. Next, meetings. And before you grow, meetings can be great, especially if you get the frequency right and who needs to be there and the facilitation right. Um, and I think following up, like having it really clear about who's going to follow up on the agreements made in the meeting to check that the person's done the thing before the next meeting. I think this is especially important in volunteer groups where everyone's just giving their time and making this work around all their other 1001 life commitments. Actually having someone overcommit but underdeliver can be really derailing for a volunteer group. So having really clear agreements about who to kind of like depersonalize it so it doesn't just become one person chasing someone. Having really clear agreements about like when's the follow-up going to happen and who's going to do that between meetings. So when you come to the meetings, the last round of things have been done and then you're ready to move on to the next step. Internal comms, literally just how you're going to talk to each other. Seems really boring, but let me tell you, if you've ever had a 1,000 email threads, you might know that it can drive you nuts. So yeah, think about, do you have like kind of the tech capacity and resources to have something like Slack, perhaps, where you can have different threads and different channels? Are you going to make a Google group? Are you just going to use email? What's your rules for how email is used? For example, always a new thread for a different subject, or like create some barriers to save yourself time and like the pain of searching through 1,000 email threads for the one bit of information you need in the long run. Or maybe it's just email for emergencies and you just have a Google Doc where you track decisions and notes. And yeah, and then task management, as Vera said, we use Asana. There's lots of other tools out there like Monday, and there's so many tools. Asana has a free version, which is still very usable. And I'm sure other tools have free versions or like cheap versions too. But yeah, definitely only recommend having tools like that if you have full commitment and uptake from your group that they're going to use them, because there's nothing worse than being like tracking everything in Asana and then other people not actually bothering to go in and like tell you if they've done the thing, or having like things in Asana and an email. So really another place, probably along with values and principles, you need full buy-in. Yeah, and so we often use Google Docs to track things, as Vera said. And so there's two different tables at the bottom here, which are two different examples of how we might track tasks or tactics. So the first one is called Mocha, or from a tool called Mocha, which I will paste the link to in the thing. And it's especially helpful when there's quite a few moving bits or people with different stakes in a decision. So task is what it is, manager is the kind of person it comes back to. And sometimes in a group, the manager, like the responsible person, actually might be the collective, like it's a collective responsibility, but you are delegating. The owner is the person who is the delegated leadership on the task. Consulted might be people from external groups that you need to run things off through, or they might be particular people in your group as well. Helper is people who are going to help with specific tasks. No one project is pulled off by one person alone. So being really specific about, right, the owner is the delegated leader for this task. Who are the people who are now committing to help with specific bits, and really noting that down. An approver, so that might be before something is delivered, especially if it's like written content or a video of some sort. Yeah, who's going to have the final sign off before it goes public? And once again, that might be kind of like in a small group or in an organization, it might be collective, like the manager role. It might be everyone needs to sign off on this. Or it could be an individual. And which comes to, and then this other table below, I think is pretty simple. It may be good for, like, you might even find yourself in the situation where you have a mocker kind of lay out the overall project, and then you might use a table like the simple table below with task notes, person responsible, due date, and status to track like the smaller tasks within it. For example, the ones that come under that helper column. Yeah, and coming back to how decisions are made, really important one. Some decisions don't need your full input. And I think it's really good to get clear about what decisions need to be everyone's had their say, and what decisions can be trusted in the hands of a smaller group of people. Or, for example, at ActionStation, we have for open letters, for us to sign on to open letters, it needs to come through at least 2 people. And now Cassie alone can sign on to open letter, or 2 managers, or there's like a certain number of campaigners that can sign the organization onto open letter. So it's, there might be different thresholds for different levels of accountability. And if you get these things clear, hopefully you'll save a lot of time. These are all ideas to save you time at their heart. And Vera, do you want to skip to the next slide? I'm not sure. Vera may be having a coughing fit, or she may have had to deal with. Yes, thank you. Sorry. Cool. So next key part of team is team roles. So being clear about who's going to do what. So I have some ideas here of key team roles that it seems like every single campaign needs. I might be wrong. I'm keen to hear your ideas of other key team roles too, but we have campaign coordination and overview. So like the person keeping on top of the wider context of the political situation and relationships. And they might be also the person following up on tasks, checking that different tasks have been done that will allow you to move to the next stage. Checking in if people need a little bit of help maybe, or more resource in some way. Then a team facilitator, and this is the person that looks after everyone. So like booking meetings, facilitating meetings, checking in on well-being and workload, onboarding new people. So this is your people person. Yeah. Communication. So that's like the person who's going to be writing your communications to go to your supporters, to your allies. Could be on socials. It could be your emails. It could be the person that like media requests go to, and then that person forwards it on to your media spokesperson or spokespeople. They choose who's the right person for this news outlet. And so these key roles might be covered in some cases, and let's be honest, we've all been there. We've been the one person trying to do all of these roles, but it's just about being really clear about what those different roles entail, and trying to spread the load and be really clear about who's responsible for what. And yeah, definitely encourage at least 4 people in a team, because as I said before, we're trying to minimize burnout and be in here for the long game. And just, I'll come back to that. And then some other ideas of key roles within groups that I've seen is graphic designers. I think we've got some here with us today. Social media wizards, people who actually understand how social media works, always handy. Photographers, especially for events and Researchers, another really important role, and people who can advise and mentor. And these people might be outside of your core group. They might just be people, you might just have these people in your network that you can draw on. But yeah, they're often roles we need. And yeah, as I said, keen to hear more in the chat about other roles that you found really helpful in campaigns you worked on. I mean, some people might think about like, who's your nonviolent direct action coordinator? That comes out with a whole new round of roles. Yeah, and then on the slide, I also have this image which is from an awesome facilitator and kind of like teamwork guru, Don Jessup. He's a Kiwi dude. You can find him online and book him anytime. And well, actually, I'm pretty sure he's still working. He's great though. And he's kind of developed this like, archetypal idea of the different roles in teams. And this is it here. So it kind of, you could probably map some of these roles of having the list along the left side onto this map. So like the creator, like the person with the great idea, that might be your campaign coordinator, or like the overview person, right? The person who's like, right, we are doing this. The promoter might be like the people going out and getting more people on board, the people who really believe in your cause. They've got the gift of the gab and they're out there being your media spokespeople, making reels on Instagram, making videos on TikTok. They're getting your word out there. The host, that's like your team facilitator, the people that brings people together, keeps them safe, makes them feel welcomed. They're like, campaign mamas. We need all of the nurturance we can get, especially when we're working on the heavy kaupapa. So it's like the person that's like looking after your team. The rationalizer, that's the person who is like making sure the right person's doing the right task, like that we're not asking, like, what name isn't in this room? We're not asking X person to write media releases when we know they get really bad, like they're an amazing editor, but they get really bad kind of like freeze up when it comes to a blank page. Or they're great at speaking, but they're not the right people to be doing the writing, or they're great at facilitating meetings. Like we've all got different roles, and it's about like having someone who's got like just keeping an eye on like what someone's actually good at and what brings them joy and how to make sure that they're doing that role. Because that's how we get the most done. And then the producer, so it's kind of the coming back to the coordination, that's the person following up and making sure the things are getting done. It's your workhorse. It's your, well, not your workhorse, but the person who's like maybe a little bit like personality A type and can be a bit intense when facilitating a meeting, but damn, they get that shit done. Yeah, and then your gatherer, that's about like feeding back. It's the person that, it's the optimist in the room. It's the person that says like, hey guys, look what we did. This is awesome. Like, let's not forget to celebrate this little milestone along the way, because we all know big wins can be few and far between in this hard work, and we've got to celebrate that milestone. And that gatherer of kind of like feedback and quality, they're feeding back to everyone else. And then your protector role, that might be the person, like it could be your legal counsel that makes sure that you're not about to be sued for defamation when you point out an undeniably close relationship between NZ First and Philip Morris, the tobacco company, for example. It might be the person who's making sure that you're keeping within your guardrails and your values. So the person that is really embodying those values that keep you guys on track and safe and being the people you want to be in the world. And then your refiner, which is quite often me, and it's one of the most uncomfortable things to be in the room, but it's the person that asks the hard questions. It's like the person that says, did we really think that's working? Or, that's quite a big jump between X and Y. Should we explore that? Or the person that's, when someone comes up with a great idea, says, but why? Why do we think that's going to work? And yeah, it's a very uncomfortable role to play, but we really, it really makes the strategy a lot stronger. Yeah, I'm keen to take a little moment just for some questions, thoughts, ideas here, if anyone has any.
Got a
Kia ora, Anna.
Thank you. That is really helpful. I love the Mocha tool. And I've definitely found that yeah, it can create a lot of unnecessary stress if you don't establish at the very beginning, like how the decisions are going to get made and who's responsible for what, and also how much time people have available. So I'm loving this conversation. Um, I'm wondering, when you're working across different groups, like a coalition, um, particularly with organizations, do you have any tools that you use to help get consensus? I'm wondering if it's maybe a little bit different with more like kind of grassroots movements. Um, yeah.
Yeah, good question. Consensus. Um,
Mm,
well, we have used Lumio before, which is literally a consensus building tool. We don't use it anymore so much, but it's definitely a possibility. In my experience, leading the Fair Future collaboration, uh, it was through facilitation, and we managed to get consensus around 7 really major, very radical actually, especially for some of the organizations in the room, calls for making Aotearoa fairer. But I think the way we built towards it was really important. Like we did tons of relationship building early on in our meetings. Like literally we'd have an hour meeting and I'd dedicate 25 minutes to like not just checking in, but like breakout rooms and like doing like kind of very unpolitical chat, like, like getting to know each other on a deeper level, like in our reasons for being there, our reasons for doing this work. So um, I think the only cut to consensus is trust and an agreed shared vision. And, like I think getting those like key steps in the strategy kind of like tested and agreed upon and like really nutting that out means that when it comes to other decisions and your values, other decisions along the way, you can kind of like look back to that and say like, oh, hey, I see why you're saying that, but we have agreed to try out this theory of change for now. And I feel like what I'm suggesting we do in this situation really aligns with the theory of change that we're currently working with. But yeah, in order to get those things built, it's really about trust and sometimes like discernment about who's in the room as well. Like if I'm calling a meeting and I'm inviting a bunch of unions, I'll think about who's the right person from the union to be there, for example. Yeah, hope that helps.
yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, totally agree. Getting that vision at the beginning and building those relationships is super important. Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. And consensus is hard. And I grew up in an environment where consensus was the norm and expected. And I have recently been challenged on the idea that like sometimes we can't always have consensus. And like we want to have consensus and I always want consensus, but sometimes within a campaign, if we've decided how decisions are made, we have to push forward without consensus. And it's either about trusting the people closest to the issue or the people, yeah, that the right people are going to make those decisions, which is hard. Patty.
One of the core issues I think is with the importance of us wanting people with wanting kaupapa led by disabled for disabled. It is around capacity. I have noticed that, but because you have to be flexible, if whānau and well, they can't help. So you have to have that flexibility around it, but at the same time, it does affect the kaupapa and what you want to actually organise. But it is that thing of we have seen as disabled, if you allow too many non-disabled on, they actually overtake the kaupapa. So it's that balance of how do you ensure that, like ultimately my kaupapa is disability leadership, but we also need allies to help us. How do you actually balance that where you actually ensure that whoever is coming on that's non-disabled is clear, hey, this is about us leading out, because it's so inherent. I've seen it happen where people will actually speak on behalf of disabled, and that's so entrenched in them, they can't, it takes a lot for them to get out of those habits. And I suppose in some ways that's a good thing when in running these kaupapa, non-disabled learn to actually realize, okay, let us lead, let us lead, let us lead. But when you're trying to organise something big, we organised a noho marae and a wānanga for Waitangi, and it was big. And we were fortunate we had allies, non-disabled allies, who actually asked us what they wanted, what we wanted them to do. But then there were others that took over. So how do you manage those kind of conversations when you have some people that aren't quite getting what is a priority for you?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. Are you asking like how do you call in the non-disabled allies into like remembering their place in the movement for disabled rights?
Yeah, because even if you do have the conversation at the start, sometimes you still kind of have to keep on with that conversation. It's similar to when we have Māori kaupapa and non-Māori, or who aren't tangata tiriti and don't actually get some of the communication they have is quite, I'll just say it, racist. So kind of how to manage those. I think sometimes it's just exhaustion. You get tired of it. But it's how to, is there a way you can plan to actually manage those conversations before you even have to hit them as a team, if you're meeting together? Because I know some people have talked about agreements and what you do, and this is the safety, but unfortunately, you still have whānau that come to the wānanga and the noho marae and the hui, they break those agreements.
Hell yeah, you do.
Mm,
And the annoying thing is it's so often by good intentions. Like it's like they're so keen and then they just really I think one way I've seen that, like especially in our Together for Te Tiriti campaign over the last 18 months, one thing I've seen as being really powerful is there's like a Māori caucus. So there's a space where only our tangata whenua colleagues go to, and they work in kind of scheme with other tangata whenua, other Māori from across the country about kind of what the movement towards honouring Te Tiriti needs. And then as Taui, like in the organization, we kind of like support that. So I think one thing that is cool in that space is that like if someone was overstepping, I think it would give an opportunity, like if Pākehā were overstepping, I would think it would have given the opportunity for that conversation to happen within Māori, within that space. And then someone can be delegated to come out and like call that person out. And I think often like what can make it uncomfortable is if we don't have those protected caucus spaces, then there's nowhere for like other disabled people or Māori to talk and be like, hey, do you think this, like, I'm feeling uncomfortable about that? And then it becomes like an individual responsibility who thinks someone's overstepping. I think like to then go out and deal with it. I think if you have like a delegator or a clear kind of like team facilitator role, then if within those caucuses a problem is highlighted, there's already someone with the delegated kind of responsibility who's going to be a people person, because people end up in that role, who will be able to sit that person down and in a really lovingly way say like, hey, Dan, we love your enthusiasm, but what we need to see from you here is moving a little slower at the pace and like making more space for someone else for disabled leadership. Or that's the only, like I honestly don't think I have.
I like the idea of a caucus because I realized I was handling a lot of the difficult conversations on my own at the noho marae, and it became very exhausting. But yeah, we had a group of disabled leaders, but again, capacity, we were all exhausted. So yeah, you're right, delegating a person to actually have the conversations if any of the whānau felt unsafe, both disabled and non-disabled, because we had a few other issues. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Especially in in-person events, I think having like a couple of those people can be really helpful. Like people know that they can go check in with if they're like, at a festival I'm involved with, we have these thing called consent guardians, but they're like, or rangers, and they're like literally just people who are always there that you kind of know you can go talk to, and then they have a support network behind them and a structure behind them to figure out how to solve a problem. I guess it's like having people who are on de-escalation roles. But yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thank you. I'll consider that because I learnt the hard way. Did not get much sleep because we were troubleshooting through the whole noho marae.
Oh, I can imagine. And like how cool that you've learned that. I mean, like sucks, right? But it's one of those like the failure, one of those
the failure things you learn from failures.
And it was
Still
really
cleaning up 1 month later.
Yeah, and it's taken so much from you. So if you can, before it's done again, or like before that situation is again, set in some structure to like do structural changes to save you that stress and load, or the next person who's in that role, like that's amazing. You've just like gifted so much more capacity to the movement for disabled rights because you've taken away like that kind of extra load that you were carrying, or at least
Yeah,
minimize.
that was the feedback from the 2 others that were helping me lead. They said, one, if we ever do this again, you need to have different people in different teams actually leading out different sections. So the transport team, being a separate team, the finance team, the funding team, they also actually need more capacity, and we definitely needed more tāne. It was a lot of wahine, which made it difficult on the paipai, on the taumata. So it was a learning experience, and it was great. We got lots of good feedback. But one of the things was I realized I exhausted myself, so I wasn't able to handle some of it. But yeah, designating a couple, 2 or 3 people would have been a good idea to actually support people if they needed to have those difficult conversations. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Oh, kaupapa guardians. Oh, kaupapa kaitiaki. I like it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just coined a new phrase, kaupapa kaitiaki. There you go. Copyrighted. No, just joking.
But like, right, share it with more people because it's such an awesome learning, and you're doing such cool stuff, by the way. Awesome. Is there anything? I think actually we should probably move on to the next section. There's going to be questions at the end. So over to you, Vera.
Awesome. I love the new term being coined in the Zoom meeting. That's great. And yeah, I'll move us over to communication strategy. Sorry. So when we think about communication strategy and we think about it in the context of a campaign, I actually really like this image or metaphor of like the rock and the balloon. And so the idea is that the politicians are like a balloon tied to a rock, and like we can swat at them. They may go left to right, but they can only go as far as the rock that's holding them, as far as the rope that's holding them to the rock. And the people are the rock. And so instead of focusing on the balloon, we should focus on the people, the rock. And when we activate people's social values, we move the rock towards us, and it automatically pulls the politicians towards us as well. And so we don't have to actually put pressure on each group's individually. It kind of just happens naturally when we focus on the rock. And so I really like this metaphor because I think that, for one, it kind of showcases people power, and I love that. And then 2, it also showcases the responsibility that we have to, our fellow community members to take the way that we communicate our campaign seriously, because it can and absolutely does influence decision making and can ultimately change the way that we live in the world. And so one of the first things we do when we think about communication strategy is thinking about who we're actually trying to talk to. And so we have 3 main groups. So you have your allies over here, so people who are already persuaded, who already agree with you. You have your neutrals, so these are people that don't really have a fixed view on your topic. They may have like mixed views, they may have no view on it at all, they may have never heard of it before. And then you have kind of the opposition on this side, which are people who oppose the changes that you're trying to advocate for, and they're unlikely to be persuaded. And so if we dive into our allies, these are the people that are supporting you. These are the people who understand why you're advocating for change. We separated them into two groups. So we have active and passive allies. So an example of a passive ally would be, people that sign your petition, people that share your social media content, but people that would never really come to like an in-person event or a rally. They kind of just like, people that support you, that are keen to do low effort actions. And then we have active allies. So these are the people that, are heavily engaged with your campaign. These are the people that, want to support you as much as they possibly can. This is like your base. They will show up on a rainy day outside of Parliament to support you. And your allies are the people who can actually reach neutrals. So they can reach the people that are open to persuasion. So you can call on them to, try and get more signatures, depending on your topic. If you create, a how to talk to your family about, let's say, seabed mining document, these are the people that will kind of take it, run with it, and go and have those conversations with their friends and their families that might be in the neutral section. The most important part to remember about this is that your supporters need to like your messaging. They need to like it enough to share it with others. Awesome. And so then we have your neutrals. So again, these are the people that we consider being open to persuasion. These are also normally the people that are like the biggest group. So in terms of numbers, this is, the biggest group. They don't necessarily have a firm viewpoint on your topic, or it's just very lightly held. They can be influenced with, great explanation, in-depth conversations. These are also the people that have probably maybe have never heard about your topic. So these are the people that you'd kind of have to like educate and be like, this is my topic. This is why I care about. The good thing is that neutrals are kind of everywhere. And so that at your job, at your class, farmers market, you can have a great conversation, really anywhere if you find your neutrals. And then we have your opposition. So your opposition tends to be the loudest. They tend to have a very strong and fixed view on your issue. They are unlikely to be shifted by anything you say, so they're not really considered persuadables. They're not considered persuadables. And these are also the people that, because of that, you don't really want to spend much time convincing to kind of like care about your topic. It can be good to keep an eye out for what they're saying, just in case, just to kind of know what you're up against, and then also in case you want to create any interventions to kind of counteract their negative messaging. Some of the traps that people fall into is actually building their communication around the opposition's narrative. And so in doing this, you're actually just amplifying their message. And so you're basically not only wasting your time and your energy and your resources, but it's actually known to not effectively shift the mindset of the people that are in the neutral. So it really kind of just is a big waste of time. Also, another important point is that normally it's considered that people only move from one section to another. They don't really jump from one end of the spectrum to the other. Yeah, awesome. So just to quickly recap the power map from our last session, if you can see it here. Ruby added some examples. So we have, Jacinda Ardern up here, PM, quite powerful, influential. Then we have some NGOs that, support you, also have a little bit of power. Then we have people with lived experience that really support you. And so the power map allows you to know where the power lies, who has it, who doesn't. And then the spectrum of allies allows you to kind of group those people into passive allies, active allies, opposition, neutral. And so once you kind of combined the knowledge that you have from both tools, you can move to the communication matrix. And, oh, sorry, Patty, I just saw that you had your hand up.
Oh, it was a question around one of the, I know it's a political tactic where you often get sidetracked with wedge, I can't remember what it was, wedge questions, which lead people to answer it so they get the reaction of their support base. But I wondered, you mentioned that not to focus too much on your opponents, but I do notice at some of the local meetings and at different, so because right now they've got the council elections coming up, so a lot of here in Northland, they have a group called Democracy Northland. So I know that they do tend to put Democracy Northland and ACT tend to put people in the meetings to question candidates. So what are skills in terms of people who are answering questions of, I think they call them crunchies. I don't know what the new term for it, for people who are actually actively there to push their specific message. How do you actually manage those conversations? Sorry, can't quite process that question right now, but do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
Oh yeah, hecklers, but they're actually there for a specific reason. They are there for a specific reason to, again, like you know that some people actually bring up these things so that, oh God, I can't remember what the term is. I remember they say it so that you actually focus on it, and then people actually remember that main issue, and instead of actually you focusing on what is a priority for you, like climate resilience, and they start talking about farmers, and it's that thing of bringing it back on track, and any skills around that.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, hecklers. I think Ruby has some experience with that, so I'll just let her answer it.
Oh gosh, this happens all the time. And media do it too, right? You're like there to talk about this really important report you've just launched, and then they ask you some question based around some really like regressive, punitive idea of the world. I like to remind us all, those of us who were alive and watching the media in John Key's time, which is like pretty ironic because he was a terrible, terrible prime minister, but he was so good at this. And he would he had this line that was like at the end of the day, and then he would say what have he said, what he wanted to talk about. So he reframed or redirected a lot. And I think there's like little sentence starters that we can use to bring it back to our values, which is so important. It can be things like, what I think it's important to remember when we're talking about the issue of, for example, youth justice, is that every child in New Zealand should have what they need to grow up. And a lot of children aren't able to access the support that they need to be growing, like grasping the great opportunities that some of us have or something, like it's what I think is important to remember. Or I just want to bring this back to, or like, let's focus on the wider issue here, which is another one you hear politicians use all the time. So why shouldn't we use it too? Let's focus on the broader issue here. And then like finding a thread that brings it back to your kaupapa, or doing like a values reframe on the broader issue. I also think it's really, like, as Vera said, with the active opposition, like with that spectrum of allies, when you do polling around most issues, like most progressive issues, you find there's kind of like 15% like active allies super into it, already on board, and about 15% active opposition. You are never going to win that 15% active opposition over. And so yes, like be polite, so treat them like they're humans, but like there's absolutely no point and like with these hecklers, like these group of people, they're obviously your active opposition. There's absolutely no point like feeling like a great responsibility to answer their questions if you know, like in their entirety, if you know they're just throwing them at you to derail the meeting. I think it's totally valid to say to keep on your mission, which is talking to the other people in your electorate, or for those politicians to say, oh, that's an interesting point. What I'd really like us to focus on right now is, or what I think is really important to remember right now, and just kind of like acknowledge, but then pivot, acknowledge and pivot. And I often think of those like public speaking or media interviews. It's often like a dance, and you're like always trying to lead your partner back to the dance that you're like, to the part of the room that you want to be in.
Oh, thank you.
Oh gosh, Sally, I wish we taught dialogical practices in Parliament. Can you go to Parliament and teach someone them? Yeah, and I think and sometimes even with people in like, well, maybe not our active opposition, but people in our, and this is less in public spaces, but in like more one-to-one conversations or small groups conversations with our passive opposition, we might hear, they might be saying regressive things, but we might hear values underneath it that we can connect with. And if you can, that's like extra bonus amazing points to say like, oh, I hear making sure everyone in our community has jobs is really important to you. That's something that's really important to me. And then talking about what that looks like to you, like, so I think there's, if you can find the values underneath as well and connect with them, awesome. Especially that, because I think most of us, at the end of the day, most of us share the really similar values about what we want for our communities and each other. We just have very different ideas of the right ways to get there.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love what you said, Sally. It absolutely is a skill, and I feel like I'm also not even that good at it, so I need to keep practicing. But yeah, it's definitely a skill that should be taught. And again, also, if someone is coming into the conversation with bad faith, I think it's absolutely fair to say, hey, I actually don't want to answer your question. This is not the space for it, sorry. And then maybe just be like, I'm happy to have a conversation another time, but not right now. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'll just dive into the communication matrix. So once we have that knowledge from the other tools, we can fill out this little map. And so this allows you to think about all of the different audiences you have and the people that might be listening to your message. And so, you have your base, you have your passive supporters, your neutrals. So you can think about, what do you want them to hear and what do they want to hear? So, your active supporters, they don't really need convincing. They normally are also well educated on your topic. So you wouldn't send them an email that's like, oh, this is why you should care, because they already do. And so for them, you could maybe actually send them emails where they can take action, where they can actually do something. Your passive allies, those might be the people that maybe they don't know too much about it. So you could do a bit of education around, the topic, but you could also try and take them on a journey that, empowers them and allows them to feel confident enough to take action so that they move towards being active allies. And then you can also think about the messenger. So sometimes when you're campaigning, it's actually a really humbling experience to realize that sometimes people just don't want to listen to you and you specifically. So you need to find out, who do they actually talk to? You know, where do they get their information from? What media do they consume? What newspapers do they read? What social media platforms do they follow? And then try and see if you can pitch on those platforms your story. The good thing about this matrix, this is kind of like a very basic version, is that you can keep adding to it. So you can, you know, add a column that focuses on how frequently you want to talk to certain groups. You can add, you know, who in the team is in charge for writing what type of message for what type of audience. You can add, you know, what tone you want for the messaging. You can go as far as adding, you know, what type of words do we want to use? What type of words do we not want to use? What phrases do we want to use? What phrases do we want to exclude? But for now, this is kind of like a good basis to build upon. And then once you've gotten the hang of it, you can get as creative as you want with it. Awesome. Yeah. And that is the end of our presentation. And now we have some time for some questions, and then also later on some time for our campaign clinic. I know that we're a little bit behind.